What's up, guys? Today I'm going to comment on Andrew Tate's newest interview with Patrick Bet Davis. It's really good. It's racked up, 8+ million views in the first kind of 24 hours. It's 4.5 hours long, thereabouts. Very, very, very interesting interview, and I highly encourage you guys to go watch it. Now, one of the posts that I put up on Hive and Steemit and Blurt and all that kind of stuff was essentially I linked to a video that he put up on Twitter, basically admitting to scamming these guys when he was doing this webcam business like 10 years ago. Now, just to kind of comment on that whole thing, essentially his business was that he was bringing these girls in and they were doing webcamming and stuff with these guys. But where it kind of became a scam, and he said all this, he didn't use the word scam, but he was basically essentially duping these guys and having the girls say that, okay, well, send me money and then I'll get the visa and I'll fly out to you. And then they knew very well that they weren't going to go do that. They'd make up this string of excuses and stuff and get these guys to keep paying and paying tens of thousands of dollars. Well, at that point, that's fraud. That's a scam. Now, should he have been thrown in prison or thrown in jail for this kind of trafficking, human trafficking related violations? They haven't really said if it had anything to do with that or any of the admissions that he made online. Now, if you go over to, and it could be hive.blog or it could be steemit.com/@BrianPhobos, you can see that post. And it was something that Tone Vase actually had retweeted that somebody else put up, but it was a clip from the Nelk Boys podcast, like the Full Sin podcast or something. And I tried to look for the full podcast and when exactly it came out, and I never could really find that. But you blatantly see Andrew Tate basically admitting to this, and it's 100% fraud what he's describing. Now, I've seen some people in the comment section saying, well, if a woman did that, then it's okay, but if a man does it, then it's fraud or it's a scam, or that the Tinder swindler did this and it wasn't fraud. But that's not the case. What the Tinder swindler was doing was fraud. He was essentially duping these women into paying him, saying that, oh, the funds didn't go through. There's a wire transfer that didn't come through. We're going to do this big, this huge deal or whatever for this diamond company. And I need the money. And can you float me, 20,000 or 30,000 or 50,000? And these women would get duped into it under the premise that he was going to pay him back, which he had no intentions of paying him back. And that's where it becomes a fraud, obviously. Now, so in regards to that, I'm just blatantly going to say that Andrew Tate has scammed people. I think that's just pretty much blatant. He admitted that. Now, in a lot of these interviews, he doesn't go into that type of thing, and he doesn't admit any kind of guilt. And I think that for him, he needs to own up to that, and he needs to pay those people back. He needs to pay those guys back that, were thinking that they were paying for these girls to come out. And you could say, well, okay, these guys are kind of these mega simps that were trying to fly these girls out, and that's prostitution. And so, but you can't really kind of 100% say that, because let's just say under the premise that if you went somewhere or you connected with, and I've seen this happen with various guys and stuff like that, where they've connected with, let's say, a chick on like Tinder, Bumble, or Hive, or it's not Hive, but Hinge or something like that, some dating app, or they ran across someone on Instagram that didn't live in their immediate vicinity, or it wasn't somewhere where they were at currently. It could have been that they moved away from there and they continued to communicate with this chick or whatever, and then they ended up flying out to meet her or something like that. I've never personally done that. That's pretty risky, because what if she ghosts you or stands you up or something like that, and you just flew somewhere. So if you're going to do that, make sure it's somewhere cool, like maybe like Florida or something like that, and then you can hit the beach or something. But it's again, let's just say under the premise of that you're going to meet this person you met online. And it's really hard to say what was said back and forth and all. Somebody would have to dig through that. But he was blatantly saying that they were, duping these guys and making up stories and saying, oh, you need to send more money, more money, more money. Well, that's a scam. So Andrew Tate, in that regard, is a scammer. Now let's talk about the interview and some of the interesting things that were said in that. And I'm going to go in here so I can rest my arm, because I don't have my gimbal. So So that being said, there was a lot of interesting things that were said in the interview. And I thought, and again, I think it's a very, very good interview for guys to watch, or women, or just anybody. And they talked about a lot of things. They talked about school shootings, why have school shootings went up, and in the last 50 years, gun ownership has not necessarily went up percentage-wise. And it's on par with a lot of these other countries that don't necessarily have the school shooting issue. They talked about other issues like, the single mom situation, in the United States and a lot of the more developed nations, the single mom apocalypse is upon us. I've talked about that a lot. You have a lot of these single parent households and stuff like that, and you don't have the same type of structure that would have occurred 80, 90, 100 years ago. Secondly, what would have been basic kind of things that would have been sort of quote unquote, I don't want to say provided, but that would have been an easy kind of lead in if you kind of just weren't a total kind of like screw up. Like if you just went to school, got a good job, and, weren't committing all types of crimes, and you weren't kind of like defrauding people or something like that, you probably would end up with a wife, and you'd probably have a family, and everything would be kind of like your quote unquote leave it to beaver kind of scenario or something, to a certain respect. But that's happening less and less. Obviously, marriage rates have plummeted, birth rates have plummeted, and it's completely collapsed in these other countries as well: South Korea, Japan, Italy, and many other nations as well. And the other reason the United States has basically an increase in population is because they've let millions of people just kind of flood across the border. So it's all immigration related, is why the population has increased. So one of the things that he said, and he verbalizes stuff very, very well. Andrew Tate is extremely smart, and he verbalizes things very well, and he has a very, very interesting take on different things. And one of the things that he feels is like the fact that there's not the religious kind of institution kind of in place for people to sort of fear. And I would say there is an element of truth to that, but I'm even seeing in these situations where there is a very strong religious base, or at least the pretense of that a lot of people are still getting divorced, and they'll basically kind of use that as a cop out that they prayed about it and they didn't feel it was right, and so they get a divorce, yada yada yada, and there's this weird custody battle and all these other kind of things. But he was basically saying that, in the Middle Eastern countries and stuff, like, they have a legitimate fear, and they have a protection of, a stronger protection of kind of their belief system and all that. Whereas a lot of times he was saying that Christians don't really have that level of conviction. You have people that say that they're Christian, but they're not really kind of like, they're talking the talk, but they're not really walking the walk, so to speak. And I would agree with that. I've seen this over and over again. And one of the things that I've determined is that it is oftentimes that's their game. That is their game. If you would memorize some Bible verses, and you would basically wear a cross and stuff like that, it's sort of this kind of like extra little thing that women will maybe kind of have on their checklist, and they'll be able to check that off. Oh, he's Christian. There's a Matt Mason song that's like, I don't know, it's like tall, white, and Christian or something like that. Like, kind of like, I'm not the guy because I'm not tall, white, and Christian, or something like that, which is pretty funny. So, again, these women have extensive checklist, and, Andrew was saying a lot of other things that made a lot of sense too. As far as competition, he said that's one of the reasons he still lives with his brother, and he has a very strong bond with his brother because he likes to have that competitive environment. Him and his brother kind of check each other and will compete, whether it's in working out, whether it's in business, and he likes to have that competitive environment pushing him, and he likes to have these other guys around the house and around the compound. They're part of his kind of his business, and they're going to be working out and going to be going after it, kind of thing. And there's a lot of truth to that. That's one of the reasons why I still kind of, I still continue to go out there, push myself in the weight room, and you have to be competent, and you have to have a certain level of ability. And there's a lot of times where you fight this internal struggle where it's like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, or this is too much time to be spending. And, but at the end of the day, it's just like, you see what happens, and you see there's only kind of 5 or maybe 10% at most guys that are still kind of going after it, because the mountain has become too tall to climb, and most guys are just sort of falling away and sort of giving up. Then you'll see on these red pill videos, someone says, well, I've been single for 15 years, or I haven't went on a date for 15 years and I'd never be happier. And it's like, no, you're not. You wouldn't be commenting on red pill videos and hanging out, commenting on these, saying this, if you were, because that is not the natural course of things. Natural course of things is for a man to, have interactions with women. That's just the truth. And that whole dynamic has completely fallen apart in our society. And this is one of the things they talked about with the school shootings that they attribute it to, is that these guys are very, very frustrated. They feel outcasted. They feel that they don't have an outlet, and so they get aggressive. And you'll see that in different studies where they've done it with animals and stuff like that. The animals get very aggressive and, act out of character and stuff like that, when the natural kind of order of things aren't able to take place, because, a man is in a situation where he needs to have access to women and, and have something that's going to drive him as far as like, having a family to provide for and stuff like that. And when that has completely kind of been extracted from our societies, you see these guys just kind of mentally just kind of fall to pieces. And the women are falling apart as well. They're lonely. They've got all kinds of pill issues, antidepressants. They're drinking wine. They're low key alcoholics. And there's been a large study on that says that where it traditionally you kind of think of this 90s sitcom or something where the guys are sitting there drinking beer or something at home, and they're asking the wife to get him a beer, this or that, and that men drink more or something like that. Well, now it's pretty much that the women are drinking more. They're wine drunk all the time. And I've ran into this personally, just anecdotally. I've seen that a lot. Just always kind of trying to keep some kind of wine buzz. Now, that being said, what were some of the other things that were talked about that was very insightful? He talked about the institution of religion, not necessarily in just kind of the premise of God as an overseen kind of like network effect of, let's say, a lot of people implementing these different rules. And then, he would say, well, I thank God that, this or that, but it wasn't kind of this one entity necessarily. It was kind of the network effect of sort of all the rules. Now, that's not the verbiage. That's not really the verbiage that he used, but the premise was interesting if you watch what he said. Another thing I thought was interesting is, he kind of he employs this kind of intermittent fasting, and essentially is kind of going off of a lot of kind of nicotine through the cigars, and and caffeine as well. He's drinking like 12 cups of coffee a day or something like that, which seems extreme. And he's eating once a day. He's usually eating like dinner. So he's doing this intermittent fasting. He's sort of keeping this kind of like anxiousness or this kind of hunger and throughout the day and stuff like that. For me personally, that's a tough play. If I went all day and I was up for 6 or 7 hours, didn't have any food, I start to feel kind of dizzy, and I definitely need some carbs in my bloodstream if I'm going to go lift harder. I'm going to do anything kind of like, where I'm going to play a sport or something like that, play basketball or anything like that, or otherwise I'll just get dizzy. Some other things I thought were interesting that he said, about he never really answered who they are. Patrick Bet David, he asked him, who are they? When it's like, okay, they are out to get you. Who are they? And this is a common thing, and we often talk in those terms. Oh, they. It's like, okay, is they the government? Is they like the World Economic Forum? Is is it the World Health Organization? Who's doing this? And I think that it seems to be too many things have fallen together to be coincidental. That our freedoms are being taken away. That they, again, I'm going to use this term, they don't want us necessarily to have these kind of level of freedoms to, have our own crops or be self-sufficient. And they want us to rely on the government seemingly and be sort of products of the state, so they can control us. And, we saw that up in Canada, obviously, with the various lockdowns and stuff like that, the truckers drove to Ottawa, and the Canadian government cut off their bank accounts and, tried to lock them out financially, try to starve them out. So in that case, they could have been the Canadian government. But it's like, well, who is Trudeau answering to? Is he answering to, World Economic Forum? Basically this, and then it's like, who's controlling that? Is just some kind of like, sometimes I feel like I'm in a video game, like somebody bought my character here and I'm supposed to go do something other than screw around, throwing baseballs or lifting weights or talking about crypto or something. But, it's we don't really know. We don't really know who's kind of ultimately in control. But at the end of the day, I would say that each individual politician is power hungry, and they did talk about that, the hunger for kind of the power, that once you have enough money, that's not necessarily the driving force, that it's more kind of this ego boost and this kind of power, and to be able to kind of control everybody like they're pawns. And it's kind of funny to them, and I would equate it, and they kind of talked about this, where it's, let's say like a hazing situation, let's say a fraternity situation, and it's like, okay, the new recruits or whatever, they're going to get hazed and stuff like that, and they're getting indoctrinated into the system and stuff like that. So we're kind of getting hazed by the powers that be, to fall into line and kind of be a gear in the machine and everything, so that, it makes them more powerful and more rich, and they just laugh, and it's funny to them. So again, I don't know if that's just kind of world leaders in general, and they feel like they're in the club. And I would equate this a little bit to baseball. When you talk about professional baseball clubs, the key word is club. You have to get in the club. And sometimes it's not necessarily maybe the best guys that arrive there. Sometimes it's the guys who got the opportunity, made the right connections, and they were allowed the opportunity to be part of the club. They got let in the clubhouse. Now, some of them being part of the clubhouse, and their brand is elevated and their last name becomes a brand. So Tate talked about this. He said that growing up, and he didn't necessarily talk about it in terms of baseball, but he talked about it in terms of his last name and protecting his last name. People don't really kind of have this identification. He said, again, let's say if he was to go crazy and like shoot up some school or something like that, that it would tarnish the Tate name. That his dad would always constantly say, you can't do that because you're a Tate. You can't do that. You can't act like that. You're a Tate. Kind of that there was this this community and this sense of your lineage that you had to protect. And I get what he's saying with that. I think that people have lost that. And in a time when there was these smaller communities, you weren't going to defraud people in the smaller community. And I would say with, let's say, dentists or something like that, or doctors, it was like you needed to do your absolute best because you didn't want it to fall back on you. If you're scamming people, that's going to fall and people are going to talk about it. Oh, don't go to him. He's a scammer. Don't go to him. He's not good. He won't repay the debt. He's not good for it. But you get in these bigger cities, people can bounce around like a ping pong ball. There's no accountability. There's no protection of your name. One of the things that I noticed going back to a small town after being, let's say, in bigger cities, you're never going to be in a bar and they're going to say, well, who are you? You're not in the bigger cities. It's not necessarily going to say that. Maybe you introduce yourself. Oh, my name's Brian. But in the smaller towns, what I've ran into, they'll be like, who are you? And I'll be like, oh, my name's Brian. It's like, Brian who? They want to know what your last name is. They want to try to make a connection. I thought that was interesting. You still do have some of that in the small towns, an identification of community, identification of your lineage. And a lot of people have lost that as high schools have consolidated and gotten bigger. And, again, a lot of these high schools say have thousands of students, and the high school is more like a college campus versus what maybe would have been, the case, 60, 70, 80 years ago, where it's smaller schools. And the cities were smaller. So I'd say there's a little bit of lost identification there. But it doesn't ultimately kind of point back to the overall underlying, and I think we're still trying to answer that question with the school shootings, because again, in some of these European nations, Whether it's, partial, it is, but even the ones where they do have access to the weapons, and percentage wise, they do have, the same percentage of guns per capita that people in the United States have. They don't necessarily have these school shootings, but their populations are declining as well. So they're not necessarily getting married, or the birth rates, they're not having kids, they're not having access to females either. So you can't just say it's like, okay, these guys have no access to women, they're frustrated, and they're just acting out, they want attention, and everybody's ignoring them, and they feel like they're just invisible. So I think that is a big part of it, but I don't think that's the overall thing. And it could be kind of like a paradox of being in the United States, and sort of the premise that, movies come from here, and a lot of people in other nations, they kind of almost think that, well, things are perfect in the United States, but that's not really kind of the case. You can go down, obviously, Skid Row in Los Angeles, and it's going to be, just as bad or worse than a lot of third world countries. Just people living in tents, and it's just everybody's drugged out and all this kind of stuff. So it's a homeless epidemic. There's a single mom apocalypse. People are just, more and more, it does seem like the United States is swirling the drain. Now, we would have a long ways to fall, I would say. Let's say we end up going into hyperinflation or something like that, where it kind of becomes more like Venezuela, or maybe it becomes like Argentina, where it's, like 100% inflation or more. So we would have a long ways to fall before that would happen. Other than that, if you kind of stay away from the news, you're sort of living your own thing and stuff like that, you could just kind of keep blinders on, and not necessarily think necessarily much is wrong from that aspect. But I would say we have still lost a lot of sense of community, and whether that comes from the partial abandonment of religion. You do have this, and you have this in Japan as well, where it's like people are going out to the woods and committing suicide and stuff like that, and they don't necessarily see it as like a consequence. And the more and more time that goes on, and based on the talks, that they had and everything, and it was interesting, it gets this big thought experiment. And, I think about the Amish, and how, we've kind of poked fun at the Amish and stuff, and people think that they're backward and stuff like that. But the Amish foresaw a lot of this stuff. There's a reason why they're in isolation. There's a reason why their community is set up the way it is. And, you could say, well, that's a different level of control. And it's all perspective. It's all from our perspective that something is backwards, or something is overbearing or controlling, and that, something is over the top, or it's too much kind of thing. So I think from that regard, I think that the mystery's still out there of, why are there so many like suicides? Why are they, I think we've only really kind of come up with part of the solution. Why are there all these school shootings and stuff like that? Why are there just kind of all this mental illness, and just really people feeling like they can't make it and stuff like that? I think it's a combination of things, but I would say it comes back to kind of the family component. People don't have as big of a safety net, and kind of the church component oftentimes has been taken out of their religious component and stuff like that. And I'm not necessarily saying that, oh, you should start going to church and stuff like that. It's hard with a lot of this stuff. It's really, really hard to kind of convince yourself of something that, and it's like, well, how much are you going to be engaged with it? If, anything that's being said, you're just kind of like, I mean, this isn't for me. This is kind of, it's really tough to make yourself kind of believe in something that isn't, hasn't been conditioned into you. And I often say that for the most part, if people were introduced to religion when they were 18, they just wouldn't believe in it. They would, if you're telling these stories, they would just basically say, wait, what video game is this? Or what movie are you talking about? They think it was some kind of wizard movie or something like that. It's not. Again, it's like, certain people are conditioned into it, and certain people, it's not going to be, they're not going to catch in. And it's hard to say how many people are acting, that is part of their game. They're going to be part of this. They kind of see the community value, or they see that as part of their game, and to have access to women there, or it has women put down their shield. So, I would say that's a lot of it. Um, Other things that were said in the video, and this video has kind of went on for quite a while. There's just was so much stuff, and it was really, really insightful. Some of the conversations they had, and it's funny because I was thinking Patrick Bet-David. I was thinking, well, he would be a good candidate for president, but he was actually born in Iran, and so he can't run for president of the United States. Andrew Tate, even though he has that British accent, because I guess he lived in London for a lot of his life, he is actually an American citizen. But the funny thing is with Andrew is that and it's more kind of liberal leaning, kind of woke agenda type people. They really don't like Andrew Tate, and they've really kind of went to kind of burn him at the stake. And he does bring up an important point. A lot of the stuff he's saying is stuff that was kind of common sense, just kind of regular stuff, 10 years ago. But we've went so far off the rails that even just saying that men need to build themselves up, they need to be strong, they need to be competent, they need to be competitive. Even just saying those normal things is almost like, oh, this is terrible. I do agree with that. And to be honest with you, I do agree with probably 95% of what he says, or at least can engage kind of in the thought process of where he's coming from with it. Another thing regarding languages, and this is probably one of the last things that I'm going to say regarding this whole thing. He lives in a foreign country. He lives over in Eastern Europe, and he doesn't know their language. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And obviously we have Google Translate, and I don't know how many times he's used that kind of translate service or something to communicate with people. But at the end of the day, he said, I'm not an expert at English. He's like, I'm still learning English. And he tries to learn new words all the time. This guy is very articulate. He's very quick-witted. And the one thing that I would like to see Andrew Tate do is debate Ben Shapiro over some kind of topic. Another thing I will mention, though, is he talked about access to women and the ability to garner women and garner their attention and stuff like that. So I've determined that essentially that we do everything for that. Everything that we do, whether it's staying on that grind, getting out there, working out, being obviously to protect ourselves and stuff. And like obviously once you have a family, kind of the mindset changes. Patrick Bet-David, he also kind of mentioned this as well, that there's a lot of noise if you're out there kind of running around trying to date and try to talk to this girl, that girl, and stuff like that. There's a lot of energy wasted in that, and I would agree. It is very, very, very exhausting. And if you had a good woman behind you that was on page with your program and was supportive, then it's just like, you could really kind of, quote unquote, shoot for the stars kind of thing and really kind of take off. Now, unfortunately, it's happening less and less and less and less. And traction is fleeting with a lot of these women. Fleeting. I mean, we're talking, and I see it all the time. I mean, dudes who are athletic, in shape, or educated, have money, so on and so forth, and they're just getting tossed to the side like they're just some kind of whatever little scrub or something like that. Again, the hoflation scenario is real. Is very, 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 very real. But Andrew Tate, he did say that you have to become confident and have to become competent in essentially garnering women's attention, being around women, and having success with women. And they can sense this. And I would say over time, for myself, it's like your kind of game. It has to evolve, but it actually progresses and stuff. So it's like you might lose ground, like let's say age-wise. Your look could deteriorate partially, so you could end up in this kind of. He didn't necessarily say this. I'm just saying this, that you can end up in this kind of situation where you're kind of like, I don't want to say floundering at the same level, where it's like your game's better, maybe your mouthpiece is better, how to kind of like have better engagement, or get to the punch kind of quicker kind of thing with these women, or kind of understand their nature better. But then you have to kind of obviously like overcome other deficiencies, because again, there's always competition. There's always new competition coming up. And then it's like, well, okay, like Then at a point, and this is one thing I didn't agree with Andrew Tate on, he basically talked about these women, being gold diggers and stuff like that, and that he's not opposed to buying these women, $500 or $1,000 handbags or something to that accord and stuff like that. And that he basically said, well, it's not necessarily about the money for them. It's more that when they see me paying all this money for myself and having these supercars and buying all these luxury items and stuff, it's this negligible thing, and it's more kind of the thought of it. But again, I just think that comes from someone who didn't honestly get some of that money. Again, going back to the beginning of the video, he did scam some of these guys out of their money. So it's ill-gotten funds, in my opinion, because I can tell you this right now, when I've earned my money, which I have earned all my money, that I'm not whimsically throwing money around. It's like, I'm not out here trying to wine and dine and have these women like play me, you know what I'm saying? So again, it's this kind of weird kind of dynamic. And what you find out, a lot of these guys that are kind of dishing out all this money, and they're just kind of like, they just kind of end up in this quasi kind of pay to play scenario, where it's like these chicks are just, they're a target, and the situation kind of becomes worse for them. And it's almost like some of these guys in the middle ground who aren't like egregiously rich, or the women know that they have funds but they're not sure how much money they have. You're more of a mystique. You're not as much of a target, kind of, so to speak. But I didn't agree with that as far as what he was saying, as far as just buying these women, different handbags, different gifts and stuff like that, and just kind of whining and dining them. I just, again, she's got to earn that. She's got to be that chick that's not this fleeting traction thing, that's just obviously out there. You have to gold digger test these women. And again, it becomes harder and harder and harder, over time. It's just, like I said this in a previous video, that it's, and again, I see it of guys of all age. I mean, I mentor these younger guys, that just, maybe they're at the gym, or guys that I've played sports with, played basketball with, or whatever. You get talking to them, and they're all running to the same thing. They could be 25, they're in shape, they're athletic, they have college degrees, they have this, they have a nice truck, they have whatever, and oftentimes they're having less traction than maybe the guys in their 30s that have kind of like organized their game better. And then the issue with all of this, and then this is kind of a sidetrack kind of thing. What you see oftentimes is these guys where you say, well, okay, yeah, this guy, he married his high school sweetheart, and okay, his game was on point. Yeah, she ended up being like pretty hot, all this kind of stuff. Again, you haven't seen the full kind of picture of that, because a lot of these dudes, the unfortunate thing is they get kind of blindsided when they're, maybe they're 32, 35, and she's off there, I'm not happy kind of thing. And she's filing for divorce, and it's an unfortunate thing, and they're going through this custody battle, and it's just a nightmare. So in the end, it's like, it's tough, man. It's tough when that's all kind of calculated into it. But Patrick Bet David, I think that he did have a very, very, very good point. He was saying that he would have, I can't remember what he said, maybe like 20 more kids, or 30 more kids, or 100 more kids, or something. He's like, I love kids. And I would agree with him. I've coached kids, I've coached youth and stuff like that. And I just love kids just getting excited, seeing their progress and that. And I would say that is a big distraction of this society, is that a lot of these kids are seeing no real progress. They have no one kind of like getting behind them and being in their corner, being like, that was good, man. Nice swing, or like, oh man, good move. Like, they're not competing. They're not getting interested in different things. They're not finding their space, whether that be like making music, whether that be like sports, whether that be they want to be a stand-up comedian, they want to have a YouTube channel. They just don't have like a community of males. A lot of times they're isolated. They just don't have friends, and they just kind of seem like these loners. And then they're just getting like, ketamined out, just fentanyled out, just pilled out, and they just don't have anything to look forward to. And I would say that is a big thing. People don't have necessarily that thing that they're looking forward to, that they're getting ready for. And that's part of the reason I've continued to compete and keep lifting weights. And it's not necessarily just to kind of like ascertain like a certain physique. It's like I have to compete with the competition. You have to overcome the competition. And I know when I'm training for something coming up that it's just like I'm dialed in way, way, way more than I'd ever be dialed in if I was just kind of going through the motions and going to the gym. And then that wasn't getting traction, because it's like you have to have like this kind of overall, all these overall facets to you, that you're not quote unquote just this gym rat. You're not quote unquote just this kind of like baseball player. You're not just this guy that goes plays basketball. You're not just this guy that is a computer nerd, knows stuff about computers. You're not just this car guy. It's just like you have to be kind of almost like have your toes in so many different things. That's another thing I've seen. Yeah, you really have to have probably like 30 different facets to you, that just makes you interesting, and that you're just this kind of mystique. It's international mystery man type of a character. So again, and it's just like, well, what's the ultimate goal? And I was surprised to hear that Andrew Tate, that he has some kids. He has a couple girls or something, and they didn't really get drill down into it. It sounds like he has a couple girls. It sounds like he's not married. I don't know how many like women he has. If he has kind of a harem of women, or if he mainly has just one chick at this point. Not really sure on that. He didn't really kind of talk about that. But I did think that was interesting, stuff like that. And it does seem like he wants to have more kids. I do think that is an important part for people that, they go out there and they have kids. And I think that's becoming harder and harder and harder. Something that was so basic and so kind of instinctual, and just the natural order of things is so incredibly hard at this point. And it's honestly like the first 5 minutes of Idiocracy. If you haven't seen that movie, it was pretty much all the stupid people are breeding, and all the people that were too analytical and trying to plan everything out and stuff like that. It's just like, the forgot to have kids generation kind of thing. So very, 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 very tough. Some of the things that our society is going for. So I guess to wrap up the video, I'm going to say what I think is going to happen to Andrew Tate. I think they will try to lock him up. Obviously we have, they're trying to lock Trump up. They're trying to lock him up and throw away the key. And they don't like these kind of guys, and it's kind of a crazy thing. And it's like, I'm not going to say that they're perfect. Again, Andrew Tate himself admitted to basically scamming these guys. So it's like, he needs to be right with that. He needs to make right with that and make peace with that. At the end of the day, I think that the majority of what he says is true. And I think a lot of people can learn a lot of things by watching that podcast. So I want to thank Andrew Tate and the whole Patrick Bet David podcast for putting together that video, because it was very insightful and it got me thinking. And I watched the whole 4 hours and 30 minutes or whatever of it. I had to watch it in kind of 3 different sections and stuff. But I do recommend it, highly recommend it. And I highly recommend a lot of the stuff that Patrick Bet David, and Valuetainment puts out, stuff like that. But if you want to find the video, I'll try to leave a link to it in this comment section below. But basically, it is a Patrick Bet David, or